As the sun dipped below the horizon, the last rays of light flickered over the fields, casting a golden glow on the old farmhouse. Its weathered shingles whispered tales of time, while the tall grass swayed, rustling with secrets. Tonight, however, it would hold a story far more gripping than anyone anticipated. They surrounded the house, shadows creeping closer, hearts racing, but the farmer knew every exit. Tom Parker stood on the porch, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the silhouettes advancing through the dusk. He'd watched them all weak strangers with unsettling intent. The whispers in town had warned him, but he shrugged them off, convinced that his life was one of hard work, not trouble. The world had a way of proving him wrong, and tonight he felt the weight of that lesson more than ever. His fingers tightened around the railing. Reports of the gang reaching out, causing havoc in neighboring towns, filled him with a mix of anger and resignation. He wasn't some feeble retiree. He was a man forged from years of tilling the land. He knew how to plant seeds, but tonight he had to nurture something far more volatile within himself: courage. In the distance, he could hear the rumbling of engines, the growl of bikes disrupting the peaceful quiet of barn owls. They had come for retribution, but Tom would fight. He turned slowly, taking a moment to survey his domain. The sprawling crops were more than just plants, they were his lifeblood. Each corner of his land held memories of laughter, toil, and sometimes tears, and he wouldn't let that legacy be tarnished. A dark figure stepped forward, a gang leader called Jace Ominous, exuding a confidence that hinted at cruelty. Jace waved a hand, signaling behind him. The throaty growls of motorcycles hushed, leaving only the soft crunching of gravel as his men approached. Their eyes glittered with malice. They were here for a fight. Tom took a deep breath and stepped off the porch, feeling the cool earth beneath his boots. He faced them, heart pounding but spirit unwavering. "I've worked this land too long for outsiders to think they can push me around," he shouted, a strong voice cutting through the evening air. Laughter erupted from the group, mocking. Jace taunted, stepping closer. "Plenty," Tom replied, his voice steady. "You don't know this land like I do." The laughter faded, but the tension thickened. A strange calm settled over Tom, a feeling that put him in touch with not just his home but the very essence of survival. In the wild, every animal knows its territory, its escape routes. Tom had learned this over the years, how to navigate the labyrinth of his own fields, how to dodge danger when it crept too close. "Let's put it to the test then," Jace offered, smirking while flexing his muscles. "You and me." Tom felt the crowd's gaze on him, heavy and expectant. A quiet urge whispered in his ear, the kind hinting at loss, reminding him of what's at stake, but he pushed it aside. Instead of confronting Jace directly, Tom envisioned the layout of his land, the narrow paths leading to the stream, the thick brush behind the barn, and the old barn itself, a remnant of years gone by. He could use that. "Let's do it," Tom replied, stepping forward, the new resolve burning bright in his chest. A ripple of surprise passed through the gang, but Jace shrugged, accepting the challenge. "Fine by me, Grandpa." Tom met Jace's eyes, a glimmer of determination as he turned away from the stairs. Each step toward the barn was a reminder of the work and sweat that built his life. More than a building, it represented a fortress. Inside, he reached for the tools that he had long since set aside, dusty but still strong. A trusty old shovel, a pitchfork, even a few old crates. As he gathered his makeshift weapons, memories surged. Days spent in the fields, nights under the stars with only the sound of cicadas as company. Each tool felt familiar, but more than that, it felt empowering. He wouldn't just be fighting for himself. He was fighting for every single piece of his history, for the legacy he hoped to leave behind. Once ready, he walked back out to face Jace, who had rallied his men into a semicircle, eager with anticipation. They were ready to see a spectacle, but Tom knew he held the advantage. Knowing the land wasn't just a tactical advantage, it was a mental one. When the stakes were high, fear could dull senses or sharpen them. Jace advanced, clenching his fists. "Let's see how far you can follow," Tom murmured under his breath, before dashing unexpectedly into the thicket behind the barn. The rustling leaves cloaked him, and he vanished from sight. He could hear the whoops and jeers behind him, but he focused on the path ahead. Here, every footfall was quiet, calculated. Confusion erupted as Tom zigzagged through the underbrush, taking advantage of his knowledge of this maze of green and brown. The gang wasn't prepared. They had been expecting a charging bull, not a cunning fox. Suddenly, he emerged from the other side of the tree line, yelling as he raised the shovel, catching Jace and his cronies off guard. One of the gang members lunged for him but stumbled as Tom sidestepped, whacking him hard in the stomach with the shovel. He crumpled, gasping for air, and Tom seized that moment to jet back into the woods. Jace shouted, frustration lacing his voice, but that frustration was of no consequence to Tom in that moment. He was in his element, a wolf in his home territory. He knew every creek and crag, each overgrown root that could lead him back. Hindsight would say it was reckless, but the adrenaline pumped through his veins, a lifeline fueling him. Jace and his men stumbled after him, shouting and growing frustrated as they found themselves further from the farmhouse with each twist and turn. Tom darted around boulders and through gaps in ancient oaks, dodging the arms reaching for him and the shadows trailing close. Each time he heard the shouts behind him blend into a cacophony of anger, he felt invincible. The noise didn't scare him, it fired him up. With each passing moment, he could hear their patience dwindling. They were used to dominating situations, not chasing shadows. The tables had turned, and he was the conductor of this chaotic symphony. It wasn't long before he decided he needed to draw them out to make them desperate. So he shifted back to the barn where he had set up a few surprises, an old hay bale precariously teetering, ropes for rigging, and more tools scattered about. Emerging from the shadows, Tom let out a loud whistle. The gang turned, eyes wide with confusion as they approached. "This isn't a game, boys. I know every inch of this land." But before he could move, Jace came charging at him, determination replacing confusion. The seconds stretched, and Tom felt time blur as he spun, hitting Jace full force with the pitchfork. The gang leader stumbled back, shock written all over his face as Tom leveraged his weight into the weapon. But with that swing, the world shifted again. As Jace fell, Tom quickly ducked behind the hay bales, knowing that the other men were scrambling to group up, tension rising, fear creeping in. Jace's voice ripped through the air, followed by a throbbing anger. Tom felt the growl of bikes starting up again, the gang pulling together. They were becoming agitated, backing into a corner now, with fear gnawing at their usual bravado. Each path he had taken had led him closer to grounding this fight, to showing them that storms could be beaten back. It wasn't just about the fight. It was about resilience, about standing firm against those who thought they could desecrate what he held dear. Just then he spotted the old barn door, a sliver of hope amidst chaos. Remembering it was the one way to their exit, something stirred within him. Tom could shift the fight. He leaped from the cover of the bales, racing towards the barn door, and with sheer determination, he shoved the door open, a thunderous sound echoing through the night. His heart raced one last time as he summoned every bit of energy and conviction left in him. He had lit a fuse. Now the barn belonged to him, and he'd show these men that shadows can't overpower light. As the gang approached, thinking they could swarm him now, he grabbed a hay bale, ready to toss it toward them. A few flinched, confusion and fear dawning, and just like that their facade cracked, belief fading. Tom's voice rang clear over the chaos. "This is my land." The realization washed over the gang as they saw his unwavering stance and fierce dedication. The energy shifted. They were now the prey lurking on the edge of an unknown expanse. The laughter and confidence they had swept onto him began to waver. Each step they took toward the barn felt heavier, as if the very soil beneath was calling for protection, calling for truth. Jace shouted, suddenly realizing that their bravado had drowned in uncertainty. As the riders turned their heads, retreating back into the faint darkness of the road, Tom stood there, heart thundering, chest rising and falling with each breath. The night surrendered back to silence, chaos diffused in the wind. Tom didn't chase them. He watched as they fled, knowing the message had been sent. He had guarded his home, shown that resilience is found not just in strength but in the knowledge of your own ground. The landscape before him lay as a testament to triumph, as old barn doors creaked in the whisper of the evening breeze. He had faced shadows under the fading light, but more importantly, he learned that every exit belongs to those who are rooted in their ground. As the stars began to ignite the night sky, Tom Parker understood he wasn't just a farmer. He was a guardian of legacy, a fierce protector fueled by love, memories, and most importantly, the spirit of the land he lent his life to. The farmhouse, embracing the night, stood defiantly under his watch, and in that fight he rediscovered the essence of being truly home. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painted the sky a deep crimson when it all began. That eerie stillness was like a warning, a hush before a storm. Up on the hill, against the backdrop of a fading day, stood the old Parker farmhouse, sturdy yet humble. It had withstood time, weathered storms, and watched seasons change, but tonight was different. Tonight, danger approached, creeping ever closer like a thief in the night. Tom Parker stood on the porch, a feel of dread settling in his gut as he watched the dark silhouettes gathering at the edge of his property. He could see them just beyond the tree line, their forms blending into the deepening shadows. Gangs had become bold in this part of the county, running wild and leaving chaos in their wake. But Tom wasn't worried about the chaos. He was worried about the safety of his land, his home, and the quiet life he had built here. As his heart pounded, he leaned against the wooden railing, feeling the rough texture beneath his palm. He had worked this land for decades, planted seeds, nurtured crops, watched them grow. He knew every inch of it, every path that wound through the fields, every hidden corner that could easily shelter a man. But now those very paths held the threat of trespassers. Heavy engines growled, rumbling like distant thunder as the gang approached, their focus on him razor-sharp. Tom straightened, the tension tightening within him. They had come for retribution, but little did they know they were trespassing into a storm that had been brewing far longer than they could fathom. Their laughs echoed against the stillness, cruel and mocking. He could hear them whispering, sizing him up, maybe thinking how easy it would be to take everything he had built. But to Tom, this wasn't just land. It was a legacy, a foundation of grit, love, and his very being. Tom spoke first, his voice steady but fierce, echoing through the twilight. A figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, chest puffed out. This was their leader, Jace, man whose reputation for violence preceded him. "You're just a farmer, old man," Jace sneered. Anger ignited within Tom like kindling. "You think strength comes from size? Let me show you something," he replied, the fire in his voice surprising even himself. That moment shifted everything. Tom knew all along that he wasn't facing just a group of men. He was facing the weight of history, myths woven through generations of farmers standing their ground. He could hear the spirits of those who had come before him whispering to him, urging him to fight. He took a step off the porch, feeling the solid earth beneath his boots, grounding him in the present. A ripple of uncertainty washed over the gang, but Jace laughed again, his bravado unyielding. Tom didn't want to fight, but he had no intention of backing down. He knew this land intimately, the paths, the bushes, even the hidden trails. With that, he turned sharply and dashed into the thicket to his left, moving like a shadow, invisible. The gang's surprise quickly morphed into confusion. They weren't prepared for this. This wasn't a standard confrontation. Tom was playing a different game, one where the stakes were personal and the backyard was not just a battleground. It was his sanctuary. He heard shouts as they scrambled to follow, engines revving and boots thudding heavily against the ground. But Tom was swift, gliding through the trees, ducking under branches, navigating paths that only a local would know. He felt lighter here, more alive, adrenaline coursing through him, pushing him forward. Feet pounding, he could now hear their frustrated growls behind him. This is how it felt to outsmart his pursuers. This was strategic gameplay wrapped in the heat of battle. He turned sharply down a narrow track, ignoring the sweat that dripped from his brow, focusing instead on what was ahead. Each adrenaline-fueled breath was a reminder of who he was, every step a pledge to protect what was his. For a second, he considered what would happen if he lost. The thought raced through his mind, almost breaking his concentration. But he shook it off. No, it wouldn't come to that. This land had offered him years of bounty, and he'd not let it be taken away now. Emerging from the trees, he found himself at the edge of the creek that ran through his property, its waters flowing peacefully, unaware of the tempest swirling above. He crouched down for just a moment, heart hammering, strategizing his next move. That's when he concocted a plan. He would draw them deeper into the wilds while slipping away again, using nature to his advantage. He kicked off his boots, leaving them behind, opting instead for the colder, wetter ground. He eased quietly toward a hidden path well known to him, where the land dropped down into a thick brush, wanting to find an angle of attack. By now, the gang had gathered, their frustration spilling over. They approached the creek, their jeers turning into shouts of anger. They were lost in the shadows, unable to see that Tom was digging deep into the very earth he had nurtured. It would be poetic, he thought, using their own overconfidence against them. He held still, letting their voices roll past him as if carried away on the wind. With a determined heart, he pivoted and made his move toward the old barn, a safe haven that had housed generations of memories. The old structure creaked as Tom slipped inside, its wooden walls holding the secrets of his family history. It stood as a fortress against time, just as he would defend it against these intruders. He breathed deeply, feeling the strength of his ancestors coursing through him. In the dim light filtering through the cracks in the barn, he scanned the room. Tools lay scattered about: an old pitchfork, a rusty shovel, a handful of crates, all remnants of his hard work. These were not just items, they represented his perseverance. He quickly gathered the pitchfork and shovel, fastening his grip around their handles. They weren't just tools, they were weapons, and he was ready. Tom listened closely as the gang approached the barn, their voices growing nearer, impatience palpable in the air. Jace ordered, drawing the men into formation. Tom clenched his fists, a rush of adrenaline sparking through him again. He peeked through a gap in the barn door. The silhouettes moved like ghosts, prowling, searching for him as they crept closer. He wouldn't let them find him, he'd make his presence known on his terms. As they stumbled through the threshold, he prepared himself. Now or never. He charged from the shadows, pitchfork raised high with a primal roar, the sound echoing through the night. The gang recoiled in surprise, their bravado sundered by his sudden assault. The initial shock motivated him, and he learned fast. Their numbers were overwhelming, but he was resourceful. As he swung his pitchfork, it connected with a man almost immediately, sending him sprawling. Jace shouted, but his commands dissolved under the crumbling confidence of his crew. They had not expected the farmer to fight back with such ferocity. They swarmed him, but as they drew nearer, Tom danced through the chaos, slipping away like water through fingers. The barn suddenly felt limiting, and he moved again, swiftly gliding through that old wooden door, a calculated retreat. He weaved through the shadows, disorienting them as they struggled to follow. At the edge of the barn, he entered the thick brush again, the familiar foliage shielding him from their sights. He could hear their frantic shouts, their unsynchronized movements, and instead of fear, a sense of triumph surged within him. He had crafted this battlefield. He knew the exits, and he would use them. Drawing on the very roots of this land, he tucked himself behind an old oak tree, breathing heavily but feeling alive. From this vantage point, he watched as Jace and his men searched the barn, shouts echoing helplessly in the night. Jace barked again, disbelief crackling through his frustration. Tom's heart raced as he contemplated his next move. The sun had now fully set, but even in darkness, he could see the gang fraying at the edges, losing their composure, and that was his strength. They were not equipped to handle a game of wits. Using the moonlight as his guide, Tom stepped away from the tree, moving silently toward a narrow path that led back toward the creek. He could still hear their distant bickering as he crept along, finding spots where he could catch a glimpse of their positions. Without further delay, he seized another moment, this time grabbing a loose crate from the barn. He would use it to create a diversion, something to throw them off their game. They were trying to bog him down, but Tom was a wild card, unpredictable. With a swift motion, he hurled the crate deep into the underbrush, creating a thunderous crash that echoed through the night. The gang jumped with surprise, turning their backs to the barn and scattering toward the sound. With their focus now diverted, Tom made his way back toward the older part of the farm, the section that blended seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. Here, the foliage was thicker, darker, perfect for an ambush. He crouched low, heart thudding as he fought the urge to move. He could hear them confusion erupting between the members of the gang. They were lost in their own chaos. Calculating his timing, Tom took a breath before launching himself from the brush, brandishing his shovel now. he shouted, channeling every ounce of strength. The sight of him sent shockwaves of disbelief through the gang. Jace stepped forward, a mix of confusion and outrage on his face. Tom grinned, every fiber of his being alight with energy. With that, he charged toward them. Instinct kicked in. He didn't wait for their reactions. The shovel swung with precision, knocking a man off his feet while he pivoted swiftly, keeping the gang at bay. They were losing momentum, and Tom felt it. He adopted a rhythm, moving fluidly between them, using their own weight against them. It was an extraordinary dance of survival, and every strike fired through him with purpose. From behind him, he heard Jace unleash a furious yell, charging straight at him, filled with reckless abandon. But Tom was ready. He sidestepped just in time, using Jace's own momentum to send him crashing into a bush, his body colliding with nature's unforgiving embrace. The gang had fractured further now, nerves breaking as they rallied and stumbled. He moved enfolded in courage. It was raw, fiery determination that surged through him, the sense of protecting everything he had ever known and loved. As it became apparent that their bravado was crumbling, Tom didn't hesitate. He pushed them once more toward the edge of the creek, and without warning, he used the pitchfork to block their advance. He bellowed. The group froze, sensing the end was near. They had ventured too deep into a homeowner's territory, and the farm was a beast unwilling to submit. Tom felt a rush of vindication flowing through him as the gang collectively stepped back. He held himself steady, muscles tense, victorious. "You've overstepped, and you won't touch what's mine." With fear drawn starkly across their faces, the gang retreated, feeling not just overwhelmed but utterly defeated. They scrambled back toward the paths they once used as a way to threaten him, but now they would rethink their decisions. Tom watched as they shoved each other, their frantic retreat echoing the lessons he had learned deep in the soil of his homeland. The very land that whispered stories of strength and perseverance had claimed this night. He stood still, breathing heavily under the night sky, heart hammering yet surging with triumph. As the moon cast its silver light upon him, Tom knew this battle was over. He had not just defended his home, he had reclaimed his story, a fierce protector of legacy, echoing through the hills, strong as ever. They did not belong here. This was his sanctuary, and he had fought for it. The old farmhouse stood tall against the backdrop of a starry night, a testament to the strength that comes from knowing every exit, every inch of your foundation. In that moment, Tom Parker felt unstoppable, a guardian of what no one could take from him. The sun was slipping below the horizon, casting a glow over the fields when the rumble of engines shattered the evening calm. The air buzzed with tension, a low hum that signaled trouble was brewing. Tom Parker stood at the kitchen window of his old farmhouse, hands resting on the worn counter. His heart raced as he watched the silhouettes of men on motorcycles, their engines roaring like beasts, weaving toward his land. Tom had lived here all his life. He knew this land like a book he had read 1,000 times. The fields stretched endlessly, with paths winding through them, hiding secrets and stories, many of which were whispered by the very earth he tended. But tonight felt different. The oppressive weight of danger lurked at the edges, and Tom felt it in his bones. The gang approached in a dark wave, their laughter slicing through the calm of twilight. They were here to intimidate, to threaten, to claim what was not theirs. Tom turned his back to the window, looking for a moment at the photographs that lined the wooden walls, pictures of family, memories of laughter and toil. This place was more than just a farmhouse. It was a fortress built on hard work, sweat, and love. In the depths of his mind, a voice whispered, urging him to run, to hide. He could hear the murmurs of the townspeople echoing in his ears, tales of how they had taken from others, how they had shown no mercy. But as the shadows danced against the walls, Tom's resolve hardened. He would not be a victim. He would stand his ground. Gathering his courage, Tom stepped outside. The porch creaked beneath his weight, the familiar sound grounding him. The sky was painted in hues of orange and deep purple, the last breath of daylight giving him strength. He could see them now, their faces lit by the afterglow, arrogant, menacing. He shouted, his voice booming against the night. Laughter erupted from their ranks, harsh and mocking. One of the men stepped forward, a grin spreading across his face. "Look at this old man. What's he gonna do? Tom felt the fire inside of him ignite, the years of hard living resonating deep within. "You don't know this land like I do. I know every exit, every trail, every hiding place out there." The gang leader, a muscular man named Jace, looked at him with disdain. "You think you can scare us away with words?" Tom stood tall, not flinching. "I don't have to scare you." Before he could blink, Jace hollered an order. The gang moved as one, circling the house like wolves eyeing prey. Anxiety bubbled in Tom's stomach, but a fierce resolve thrummed through his veins. He could not allow them to surround him without a fight. He quickly scanned his surroundings, thoughts racing. The old farmhouse was sturdy, but its true strength lay in what lay beyond its walls. The fields were his refuge, a network of trails only he knew. There were creeks, brushy patches, and a never-ending expanse of land crafted by his hands, the hands of a farmer who wouldn't back down. Tom made a crucial decision. He retreated inside the house, sensing the gang following closely behind, their whispers growing louder. Kneeling by the kitchen table, he grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, illuminating the room with a focused beam. He had to think quickly. Hours spent farming had attuned him to his land, the sounds, the rhythms, the very pulse of it. He remembered the paths overgrown with weeds, the old barn on the far side of the property where they thought he wouldn't dare to go. With the flashlight illuminating his path, he stepped lightly, each move deliberate. The gang burst through the door, but Tom was gone, having slipped away through one of the many exits he had prepared for this very day. He darted across the fields, breath barely escaping his lips, heart pounding with urgency. He could hear their frustrated yells behind him. "Split up!" Jace shouted, the panic rising in his voice. Tom could feel the adrenaline racing through him, a tide pulling him forward. He navigated through the fields, ducking under low-hanging branches, his mind racing as he rehearsed his escape. His years of labor on this land had granted him knowledge and strength. He had learned to move quietly through the fields, to listen to the signals of nature. In many ways, this felt like a harvest, a crop not of grain, but of survival and cunning. He broke through a thicket and made his way toward the barn, holding onto hope and strategy. He would use the barn as shelter, a point from which he could outmaneuver them. When he reached it, he picked up a scattered pitchfork, feeling its weight in his hands, an extension of his resolve. The barn's door creaked as he moved inside, and for a moment, silence wrapped around him. Dust motes swirled in the beams of moonlight filtering through the broken windows. This place, filled with memories of work, held a power he could now harness. Stepping cautiously, Tom pressed his ear against the wall, listening to the gang's approach. He could hear them, voices penetrating the stillness. No way he could have gone this far. One of them griped. Tom smiled to himself, the thrill of the hunt now on his side. He could almost feel their uncertainty. They thought they had the upper hand, but they had underestimated him. As if on cue, their voices drew closer. "Get the flashlights," Jace ordered. Now was the moment. Tom moved with purpose, opening the barn door just wide enough to slip through unnoticed. He could barely make out the silhouettes of the men as they approached, weak beams of light flickering around the barn's entrance. He began to take the long way around the barn, keeping low to the ground. The shadows shifted and stretched as he focused on every movement. He could see the flickers of their flashlights swaying above him, and he paused, the thrill of danger igniting every sense in his body. As he crept along the side of the barn, he breathed in the cool night air, the smell of damp earth and hay surrounding him. The night was his ally, the darkness offered him protection. Then he spotted it, the old access point, a small, overgrown path leading deeper into the fields. He dashed for it, slipping into the thicket as quietly as possible. The gang's voices were now a mix of frustration and disbelief. Where did he go? Jace was losing control, and Tom relished the moment. He was no longer just defending a home, he was rewriting the story of this night. Tom kept moving, the trees closing in around him, branches scratching against his skin. He knew he had to keep his distance, anticipating where they would turn. They would think he had nowhere to run, but he was determined to show them how misleading appearances could be. With each cautious step, he mentally charted his escape routes. He could see the nearby creek shimmering under the moonlight, its gentle rush a comforting sound amid the chaos swirling in his chest. Then he spotted a gap near the water-in informal bridge made from fallen logs. He crept silently to it, wishing he could use this moment to reclaim not just his night but his very spirit. Here, away from the hostility, he felt a flicker of peace. Climbing onto the bridge, he crouched low, watching. The gang was frenzied, their flashlights cutting through the darkness wildly, each beam illuminating patches of moon-drenched land. "Tom!" Jace shouted into the void, but Tom stayed quiet, knowing that the more noise they made, the less power they held. Suddenly, one of the gang members, a larger man with a scowl on his face, called out, "I can see him." Tom's heart raced as he saw them break into a run towards him. Time slowed as he thought about the lengths he'd go to protect this place, this life, this legacy. The creek was now the path before him, an escape route that he could use to get to the other side of the property. As they sprinted, Tom leaped off the logs into the shallow water. The cold sent a jolt through him, but he used it to fuel his movements, knowing that they would hesitate to follow him into the freezing depths. The splash of the water echoed, fading into the night. He moved stealthily along the bank, hugging close to the brush. The gang hesitated, uncertainty eclipsing their bravado. "Don't go in there," one of them shouted, the fear creeping into their voices. Tom took the moment to break into a sprint across the field, the night air filling his lungs. He found himself darting toward the old silo, a relic from days gone by, but now it served as a perfect haven. It was sturdy, practical, offering more than just protection, it offered a plan. As he reached the silo, he crept around it, finding a spot where he could hide just before Jace and his crew reached the other side of the creek. He could hear their heavy footsteps approaching, and every instinct told him he had to blend into the silence. Jace's voice further suffocated with confusion. Tom waited, breath shallow, heart pounding against his chest. As the men drew nearer, the frustration in their voices rose higher. "We're wasting our time," one of them said, exasperated. "No," Jace shot back, rage dripping from every word. Tom felt a surge of confidence, the slightest grin tugging at his lips as he listened to their bickering. They were losing sight of their goal, consumed by anger and confusion, a primal instinct to hunt, but without the mastery of their prey. An idea flickered in his mind. Perhaps he could lead them in circles, playing the game on his terms. With that thought, he repositioned himself carefully, edging away from their line of sight without making a sound. The night was still alive with sounds, crickets chirping, the gentle rustle of leaves, as if nature itself had chosen a side. Then he saw it, a faint glimmer in the darkness. The old windmill stood crookedly in the far field, its blades rusted but intact. It could serve as a lookout, a point from which he could observe the gang's movements. Tom moved swiftly, skirting through the tall grass, confident in his knowledge of this land he loved. He reached the windmill, climbing the rickety steps, each creak beneath him a reminder of the years spent working the farm. Once atop the windmill, he crouched low, using the height to his advantage. The crew was still scouring the area below, their frustration palpable. Tom could see them pacing, splitting up once more as they argued about their next move. One shouted, but Jace growled back. No, he wouldn't go that way. Tom watched, every nerve alive with anticipation. He had become the spectator of a play where the actors were unaware of the true storyteller behind the scenes. With a sudden brilliance of instinct, Tom decided it was time for the final act. He took a deep breath, gathering the echoes of all those who had come before him, the farmers, the resilient spirit of the land binding them all together. With deft precision, he grabbed a loose piece of metal from the edge of the windmill and aimed it toward the ground, planting it firmly. The clang echoed like a cannonball in the still night. Jace shot his head up, eyes scanning the landscape. Tom's heart raced. He had created a distraction, one that would draw them all away from where he truly wanted to lead them, a new escape route along the fence row where they would never suspect. As they rushed toward the sound, Tom slid down the windmill's side, nimble and practiced, taking off into the night once again. The moon hung high, illuminating the way, lighting up the fields as he dashed through the fence row. The gang's voices turned frantic behind him. "He's to the right." One yelled, but Tom was already slipping through the carefully crafted path he had forged for himself. This wasn't just a route, it was a lifeline. Time seemed to warp around him as he pushed forward, limbs aching but determination binding him. As he reached the far side of the property, he paused, catching his breath, listening intently. The gang had now split into frantic searches, their earlier bravado completely shattered. Jace hissed, desperation evident, but Tom knew the land didn't lie. With one last glance, he spotted his prize, the old wooden bridge at the edge of the stream, a place that had seen countless seasons shift. It had been a refuge, a playground, and now it would serve as a gateway and exit. In a final surge of will, Tom sprinted toward the bridge, adrenaline fueling his every step. Just as he reached the middle, he turned and with a fierce shout called back to the gang, "Your time is up." Jace, furious, surged forward, but it was too late. Tom had already crossed the threshold. The old wood underfoot creaked, and for a moment suspended in time, he turned to watch Jace focus on him. He could see the realization dawn on Jace's face: the game was over. Tom's heart swelled with triumph, filling his lungs with the sweet air of victory. The gang reeled back, frustration simmering as Tom stood firm, the bridge beneath him a testament to all he had fought for. They had underestimated him, just as he knew they would. The night was his ally, the land his home, and every exit was a reminder of the fight he would wage to protect it. As Jace turned back, rage contorted across his face. The sound of retreat blended with the night, the sound of resilience echoing throughout the fields. Tom breathed deeply, a newfound sense of peace wrapping around him. He had reclaimed not just his home, but also the narrative that belonged to him. He was not just a farmer, he was the guardian of his legacy, a man rooted in the land, unwavering, and fiercely devoted to protecting every exit that was rightfully his. In this game of shadows, Tom Parker had proven the strength of heart over brute force, a testament to the power of knowing every inch of the ground beneath him. The sun dipped below the horizon, and darkness enveloped the countryside, wrapping the old Parker farmhouse in a cloak of uncertainty. Tom Parker stood by the window, sipping his coffee, a faint ache of weariness behind his eyes. The evening had always been a time for peace, for winding down after a long day of work. But tonight, that peace felt like a distant memory. The sounds of revving engines shattered the stillness, pulling him from his thoughts. He peered outside and his stomach twisted. A group of motorcycles rolled into view, their headlights piercing through the shadows. 6 figures clad in leather and menace surrounded his house like vultures circling a dying animal. Tom's heart raced. He had heard the stories' accounts of the gang that had terrorized neighboring farms. They demanded money, food, respect. But to Tom, this was more than just a confrontation. It was a challenge to everything he had built. He was no ordinary farmer. He had inherited this house from generations before him, a legacy passed down through hard work and resilience. Each creak of the floorboards reminded him of his father, who had stood in this very spot, arms crossed, unyielding against threats. The land had nourished them, and now it was time for him to protect it. Fear twisted in his gut, but he squashed it down. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his response. He was going to fight for his home. He turned away from the window, moving to the front door. A bolt of adrenaline shot through him as he unlatched it and stepped into the cool night air. Tom called out, every ounce of anger and determination filling his voice. The gang leader stepped forward, a hulking man with a rough face and eyes that glinted with malice. "Easy there, farmer." Tom could feel the familiar textures of the land around him, the rough wood of the door, the cool earth beneath his boots anchoring him in the moment. "I don't want any trouble," he replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Laughter erupted from the gang, a cruel sound that cut through the evening air. "You think you can scare us off your little patch of land?" Tom squared his shoulders, pulse quickening as he surveyed his surroundings. This was not just any land, it was his land. He knew every hidden path, every exit, every piece of brush that could shield him. But would that knowledge be enough against the threat closing in? As they stepped closer, Tom backed up, retreating into the house. The air inside felt thick, charged with tension. He glanced around, taking in the familiar sights, the old photographs on the walls, the kitchen table stained with years of memories. This was his sanctuary, but now it felt vulnerable, exposed. He could hear them outside, their voices rising and falling, mocking, taunting. "He's just an old farmer. Let's show him what we can do," one jeered. Tom clenched his fists. He needed to act fast. He knew he had a home filled with more than just physical possessions. It was filled with heart and soul. Quickly, Tom made his way through the kitchen, grabbing a heavy flashlight from the drawer. He slipped quietly back outside, determined to regain control of the situation. Each step felt deliberate, purposeful, the rhythm of a man who would not back down. The gang continued their chatter, oblivious, their bravado masking the unease beneath. It was a mask he was determined to shatter. Tom stepped into the thickening shadows, positioning himself just outside the beam of their flashlights. The night was silent, holding its breath. Time to show them, he thought. With a sudden burst of energy, Tom flicked on the flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness like a blade. "You want me?" he shouted, his voice roaring into the night. Surprised, the gang turned, eyes wide, caught off guard by this sudden display of defiance. Tom charged toward them, adrenaline fueling his every move. The flashlight swung like a club, illuminating their faces, eyes narrow with doubt, mouths agape in shock. He moved fast, darting towards the edge of his property where the trees thickened. The woods held all the secrets of his childhood, and tonight they would be his allies. He felt alive, every nerve ending buzzing with purpose. Jace ordered, the gang scrambling to follow him. Tom knew the layout of his land better than they ever could. As they swarmed the area, he ducked behind a patch of dense underbrush, the familiar sense of earth and leaves filling his lungs. He watched as the gang fumbled, confusion etched across their faces. They were out of their element, and he reveled in that uncertainty. He dashed deeper into the woods, taking a narrow trail that led to a stream. The sound of rushing water combined with the whispering wind emboldened him. Here, he was no longer just a bewildered farmer, he was the master of his domain. Each step felt purposeful, a dance he had practiced all his life. Emerging from the trees, Tom crouched low to the ground, listening for their movements. The gang's voices grew frantic, their pursuit turning into a desperate search. He has to be close. From this vantage point, Tom could see everything. The way they bickered amongst themselves, how their confidence began to fade like the daylight behind them. They were hunters now, but he had become the ghost, slipping through the shadows. In the distance, the old barn came into view, a familiar silhouette against the setting sun. He had this place mapped in his mind, every corner a safe haven. He decided to make it his next stop. Slinging the flashlight over his shoulder, he sprinted toward the barn, not looking back. One of the men hollered, footsteps racing behind him. As Tom neared the barn, he ducked inside, readying himself. The musty air filled his lungs as he scanned the space. Rumpled old hay bales lined the walls, tools scattered about a treasure trove of possibilities. Grabbing a rusty pitchfork resting in the corner, he felt a surge of power course through him. He wasn't just protecting his home, he was embodying the spirit of all who had come before him. "Let's see how they handle this," he whispered, a grin creeping onto his face. As the gang burst through the door, Tom stood for a split second, silhouetted against the fading light. His mere presence startled them, their bravado beginning to crack. They hadn't expected resistance. They thought they could walk in, take what they wanted, and leave. But he was a different breed, a farmer willing to fight for what was his. He shouted, brandishing the pitchfork. They stumbled backward, unsure. The air buzzed with tension, the silence heavy. In that moment, Tom felt electric. This was his stand. Memories surged through him, his father's teachings, the lessons of hard work and grit. The land had shaped him, and tonight he would not let it down. With a howl, Jace lunged forward, but Tom sidestepped with practiced ease, using Jace's momentum against him. The gang shuffled behind, regrouping as Tom drove forward. He swung the pitchfork, connecting with one of the men, sending him sprawling into a heap of hay. "What's the matter, boys?" Tom taunted, adrenaline pumping as they stared at him in disbelief. The gang hesitated, unsure whether to retreat or fight. Tom used that moment to his advantage. With precision, he maneuvered around the barn, making it clear that he was no easy target. He could hear the whispers, the panicked exchanges among them. One exclaimed. He felt the shift, the dawning realization that fear was creeping in a crack in their armor. Another shouted, breathless, With renewed vigor they charged, but Tom was the embodiment of the land of force woven from miles of resilience. He ducked, weaved, and struck, utilizing the ladder in the corner as a means to climb to safety. From above, he had the advantage. He called out, gripping the rungs tightly. They surged forward, flailing about, desperate to ground him. Tom felt the rush of heat in his chest, feeding off their confusion. He noted the tools lining the wall, the old shovels, heavy and worn from countless days of work. Without hesitation, he grabbed one, tossing it down. It hit one of the men squarely in the leg, causing him to yelp and stumble. Laughter bubbled up from Tom as he steadied himself above the chaos. He shouted, confidence soaring. While they grappled with each other, Tom took stock of his surroundings. He could see a hole at the far side of the barn, an older, forgotten exit he hadn't used in years but remembered well. It would lead him to the other side of the property, where a thicket could provide cover. At that moment, Tom knew what to do. He slipped down quickly, landing silently amid the chaos, and made his way toward the hole. His heart raced, urging him on. He was a shadow among shadows, an apparition that wouldn't be caught. As he crawled through the gap, he could hear the gang grow desperate behind him. Where is he? Jace spat, anger dripping from his voice. Emerging on the other side, Tom paused momentarily to catch his breath. He could hear their frustrated cries, echoes of failure ringing out into the still night air. The tables had turned, and he could almost taste victory. He took off toward the tree line, weaving through the underbrush with practiced ease. Memories of childhood laughter echoed in his head, playing hide-and-seek with friends, racing through the fields without a care. It felt like a lifetime ago, but now those memories filled him with strength. Jace and his gang sprinted around the barn, their trust in their own strength shattered. Tom could sense their panic, their precious bravado crumbling beneath the weight of his defiance. They were stumbling now, realizing they had given him the advantage, and that realization was thrilling. He could hear them huffing and puffing, voices rising in frustration. "Look!" one of the gang members shouted, pointing toward the trees. Tom felt an electric pulse run through him. He knew every inch of this land, every hidden path that could take him to safety. He slipped behind a large oak, catching his breath. The darkness offered him solace, the world around him narrowing to just this moment. The gang moved closer, their anger palpable. "Where is he?" Jace yelled, gasping for breath. Tom smirked to himself. This was his moment. Watching closely, he waited until they grouped together, frustration boiling over. Then with a fierce shout, he charged out from behind the tree, the pitchfork at the ready. Jace turned just in time, eyes wide with disbelief as Tom bore down on them. The gang stumbled backward, shock momentarily freezing them in place. Jace shouted, but the fight had gone from their eyes. Panic replaced their arrogance as they scrambled away, shoving each other in their desperate escape. Tom felt the thrill of the chase surge within him, the rush of victory washing over him like a tide. He called out, smiling as he pursued. "Run!" With the gang retreating, Tom slowed, feeling a wave of triumph wash over him. They had underestimated him, the farmer who knew every inch of his land. As he returned to the farmhouse, the moon glowed brightly overhead, casting a silver light across the fields. Tom could feel the stillness return to the night, the weight of fear lifting from his shoulders. With every heartbeat, he could taste the triumph of standing firm, a legacy upheld, a fight won. The land around him felt alive, singing a quiet song of resilience. Tom had faced the shadows, and he had emerged victorious, a guardian of his home, ready to welcome whatever the dawn would bring. The last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the Parker farmhouse. As Tom Parker peered out the grimy window of his kitchen, the familiar comforts of home felt suddenly foreign. Distant engines rumbled, breaking the stillness of the evening. It wasn't just the sound of a passing car. It was more ominous, a low growl creeping closer. In an instant, dread curled in his stomach like a snake ready to strike. He had heard the stories about this gang, a group of thugs known for intimidation, preying on farmers in the area. Words of their reckless abandon had reached his ears too many times, but this was different. Tonight they weren't just whispers and shadows, they were here, surrounding his house. Tom's heart raced as he counted the figures in the distance. 6 of them, clad in leather, their bikes glistening under the fading light. They moved like wolves, circling their prey, the glint of malice evident in their eyes. He knew he had to act, and quickly. He stepped back from the window, breath coming in sharp gasps. This wasn't just a random attack, it was personal. His farm was sacred ground, a legacy built on blood, sweat, and determination. It had been in his family for generations, and he would die before letting anyone take it from him. He shouted, his voice steady as he stepped out onto the porch, heart pounding in his chest. The gang leader stepped forward, a mountain of a man with a jagged scar running down his cheek. "Just looking for a good time, farmer," he sneered, confidence radiating from his smug grin. Tom clenched his fists, feeling anger rise up like fire within him. Laughter erupted from behind the leader, a cruel, mocking sound that cut through the twilight. "Is that so?" The leader waved a hand and the others moved closer, encroaching on his space. Tom's mind raced. He could feel the walls closing in, but he refused to succumb to fear. He turned on his heel and dashed back into the house, slamming the door behind him. Each heartbeat echoed in the silence, but he had to think. The farmhouse was sturdy, but it was surrounded. He could sense desperation creeping in, yet deep within him, a flicker of determination ignited. He moved quickly through the dimly lit house, remembering the stories his father had told him about this very moment, how his ancestors had defended their land against adversity. He could hear their voices in his mind, encouraging him to fight back. He opened a drawer in the kitchen and took hold of the heavy flashlight. It wasn't much, but it would serve as a beacon in the dark and a weapon if need be. Peering out through the curtains, he could see them milling about outside, their laughter mingling with the crisp evening air. One of them called, a hint of impatience creeping into his tone. Tom took a deep breath and moved cautiously to the back door, knowing the layout of his property like the back of his hand. He had grown up playing hide-and-seek in these very fields. The tall grass and the thick woods around him were not only his childhood playground, they were his lifeline. He pushed open the back door, blanketed in shadows, and slipped into the cool night air. The world outside felt different, the silence laden with tension. He could hear their voices clearer now, a murmur of discomfort creeping over the calm as they awaited his next move. Jace's voice rang out again, rising above the rest. Tom smiled to himself. He wasn't disappearing, he was preparing. He moved toward the edge of the woods, using the cover of night to conceal himself. A distant ambush seemed the best way to strike back at these predators who sought only to take. With stealth, he made his way through the tall grasses, darting toward a thicket of trees that lined the boundary of his property. Here, he crouched low, heart racing but unwavering, a predator now among them. He felt alive, ignited by the necessity to defy their expectations. But it wouldn't be easy. The gang had split up, their eyes scanning for movement, searching for him among the shadows. One called out, uncertainty tinging his tone. Tom clutched the flashlight tightly, sweat trickling down his brow. This wasn't a game, this was a fight for everything he cherished. He had every intention of reclaiming control, and he knew he could outsmart them. Just then he spotted Jace, striding boldly through the clearing, arrogance dripping from his every move. Tom could see the leader's attempt to rattle him, exposing the gang's weakness, misguided overconfidence. In a flash, Tom lunged forward, flicking on the flashlight. He stepped from the shadows, illuminating the area with a fierce beam of light that temporarily blinded Jace. Tom shouted, feeling a rush of adrenaline surge through him. The gang whipped around, startled by the sudden appearance. Jace squinted against the brightness, anger flashing in his eyes. "Get him!" Tom sprinted back toward the thicket, weaving through the trees and plants he knew so well. He felt the ground hard beneath his feet, each step a declaration of defiance as he darted through the underbrush. The familiar sense of pine and damp earth filled his nostrils, grounding him as his heart raced. Jace bellowed, frustration rising. The gang was closing in, but Tom was moving faster. He could feel the panic behind him, footsteps now becoming frantic cries as they struggled to keep their composure. It gave him strength, a renewed focus. He could hear the rustling, but he was already a step ahead. Tom made his way to the old barn, a refuge he knew by heart. He slipped inside, adrenaline coursing through him as he glanced around at the dusty tools and old memories. This place had seen so many seasons, each filled with hard work and determination. He grabbed a rusty pitchfork propped against the wall, feeling empowered. If they wanted a fight, he would show them what a farmer was truly made of. From the side of the barn, he peered out through a crack in the wooden wall, watching as the gang fanned out across the property, out of their element. Tom could hear them bickering, their confidence floundering. One yelled, frustration bubbling under the surface. With a sudden burst of courage, Tom slipped out from behind the barn, heart pounding. He needed to lead them away from the house and away from any chance of causing more harm. He made quick decisions, sprinting across the open field toward the creek. The cool air hit his face like a rush of life as he dashed toward the water, weaving between the tall grass and wildflowers. He could hear them behind him, voices rising in panic as they struggled to keep up. "He's by the creek," Jace shouted, the urgency creeping into his voice. Tom could see the glimmer of the water ahead mirroring the moonlight above. He had always loved this creek. It had provided solace during difficult times, a place to think and breathe. Tonight it would be his escape. With each step he felt the thrill of being alive surge through him, reminding him of the game he played as a boy. Nature was his ally and he was in his element. As he reached the bank, he paused momentarily, listening. "They're getting closer," he thought. He had to act quickly. As he turned to dash along the creek, the gang approached, yelling confusion, but he was ready. He slipped beneath the cover of the dense bushes that lined the water. The gang moved swiftly, their heavy boots crunching against the gravel, desperation becoming palpable. One of them asked, hesitation now drifting in his voice. Feeling their frustration, Tom smirked to himself, taking refuge among the shadows. He had drawn them away from the house, but he needed to capitalize on it. He moved quietly along the bank, keeping low, every fiber of his being focused on their movements. Then, with the flick of an idea, he ran forward, snapping a branch and sending it crashing to the ground. The sound echoed through the still night. He shouted, a faint roar in his throat, then dashed back, disappearing into the recesses of the foliage. They scattered, searching wildly, and Tom reveled in their uncertainty. He could hear their heavy breaths, their frustration rising like a tide. Jace shouted, anger boiling over, but this was too late. Tom watched as they fell further apart, their cohesion fragmenting, exposing their flaws. The fear of losing had overtaken their earlier bravado. This was his chance. He steadied himself, knowing the next few moments would be pivotal. He waited until they had turned their backs and then bolted toward the farm, eyes locked ahead. He envisioned the old windmill standing tall across the fields, a relic of another time but still strong, still standing. The night offered him a cloak of safety, and he pressed on, resolute in his determination. Emerging from the woods, Tom could see the windmill bathed in moonlight, its towering frame a symbol of resiliency. It offered intrigue, a backdrop against which he could rally. But the gang was regrouping. Tom could hear them calling out to one another, their voices rising in urgency. "He's back at the farm." But Tom was already moving. He rushed toward the windmill, his heart thundering in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. A plan began to form. This would be a moment to outsmart them. He reached the base of the windmill and ducked low, heart racing as he heard them charge toward the house. He needed them to believe he was there. Climbing quickly, he made his way up the rickety steps, breath steady as he peered down. The moonlight danced on the ground below, illuminating the gang's shadowy figures as they approached the farmhouse, ready to pounce. He could hear them. "He's in there," Jace shouted, rushing forward, a sudden surge of confidence returning to him. With a fierce drop, Tom picked up a handful of loose dirt and dust from the windmill's floor. He leaned over the edge, heart racing. As they entered the house, he emptied it from his hand down onto Jace, who had rushed in first. He laughed, surprise etching his features. The gang erupted in confusion, scrambling. Someone shouted as dust filled the air. Tom seized the moment, climbing back down the windmill, heart filled with triumph. Crowing, he charged back toward the barn, shouting once again, "You can't scare me away." The gang turned, eyes wide with shock, the confidence from moments before quickly dissipating. Jace stammered, nervousness creeping into his voice as they scrambled backward. With that moment of hesitation, Tom dove behind the barn, heart pounding fiercely in his chest. Behind him, he could hear the gang bickering. their bravado crumbling with each passing second. Tom took a moment to catch his breath and recenter. He was no longer just a farmer. He was a Forza guardian willing to fight for everything he held dear. The land beneath him whispered stories of strength, and he felt its pulse resonating with his own. Suddenly, a plan came to him. The narrow pathway behind the barn led to the fields, the perfect escape, the perfect ambush. In that moment of realization, he acted. Tom sprinted toward the fence line, keeping low, moving fast. He could taste victory in the air, a sweet reminder of the power he wielded over his own land. Then he stopped and turned, facing the gang approaching from behind, their faces masked with anger, fear looming larger than their threats. He shouted, stepping forward, hands gripping the pitchfork. The gang hesitated, their bravado wavering. As they approached, confusion danced in their eyes, and Tom seized that moment. He lunged forward, brandishing the pitchfork as he confronted them head-on. Jace bellowed, but it didn't matter now. Tom could see their confidence wavering, their solidarity dissolving into panic. He swung with purpose, striking hard. The sound of the pitchfork connecting echoed, a resounding reminder of his will to defend his land. They scattered, fighting against both fear and his growing determination. One by one, they fell back, nerves crumbling beneath the weight of uncertainty. One of the gang members yelled as they dashed for their bikes, scrambling to regroup. Tom felt the heat of victory surge through him. With each passing moment, they relinquished their grip on intimidation, realizing they had underestimated him. Tom roared, determination ringing clear in the night air. As Jace turned to flee, the gang's confidence evaporated like morning mist. They sprinted toward their motorcycles, and Tom watched, exhilarated, as they sped away from the very land they thought they could conquer. They wouldn't be back, not after this. He stood there, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his brow, every inch of his being pulsing with triumph. The farmhouse loomed behind him like a fortress, watching over him as he reclaimed his home. The moon cast its gentle glow upon the fields, and Tom breathed deep, each breath filled with the spirit of resilience. The night belonged to him now, and he had proven that no threat could take away what the land had nurtured. As he took a moment to savor his victory, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. A farmer in every sense, but also a warrior rooted deeply in the soil, a guardian ready to protect against any storm. The old Parker farmhouse stood tall, a testament to heritage, growth, and unwavering resolve. He knew every exit, and he had fought fiercely to defend what was rightfully his. The evening air buzzed with the low hum of cicadas when Tom Parker first noticed the engines. It was a sound he had become accustomed to during long summer nights, a distant whisper that signaled the end of another day on his quiet farm. But something felt wrong. The engines drew closer, their growls mixing with the gentle rustle of leaves. He leaned against the weathered doorframe of his farmhouse, a sense of foreboding creeping up his spine. Suddenly, headlights shone through the gathering darkness, illuminating the gravel path that wound through his property. Tom's heart sank. It was a gang, the same one that had caused chaos in nearby towns, their reputation preceding them like an ominous storm cloud on the horizon. He knew the stories. They were notorious for showing no mercy, invading homes and taking whatever they pleased. Tom clenched his jaw, a fire igniting within him. He wasn't going to let them take anything from him, not his land, not his legacy. Gripping the door handle, he stepped outside to meet the oncoming threat. The bright lights danced around him, casting flickering shadows. There they were, clustered around the bikes, leather jackets gleaming, laughter spilling over the tension of the moment. They looked like a pack of wolves, hungry and ready to feast. One of them shouted, a tall, burly man with a scar across his cheek, stepping forward. "We're just here to have a chat." Tom squared his shoulders, standing tall despite the knot of fear in his gut. "You won't find anything here worth taking," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The man chuckled, a low, menacing sound. He glanced back at his gang, confidence radiating from him. "You see this?" Tom's heart raced as dread settled thick in the air. They moved closer, surrounding him, cutting off any route of escape. He quickly scanned the perimeter. The farmhouse felt like a fortress, but the walls were closing in. His mind raced, remembering the small details he had learned from years of working this land. Every exit, every path he had traveled. Suddenly, an idea sparked in his mind. This farmhouse wasn't just a building. It was a home filled with years of memories, hard work, and roots that ran deep. The thoughts of his father's lessons echoed in his head. A farmer knows the land intimately, and it's time to show these men just how much. In that moment, he turned on his heel and dashed back inside the house, adrenaline rushing through his veins. He needed to act fast. He moved through the kitchen, glancing at old photographs on the wall, snapshots of family, generations of laughter and resilience. They reminded him of what was at stake. As Tom ducked into the pastures of his memories, he stopped by the old coat rack by the back door. Grabbing a heavy jacket, he slung it over his shoulders, its weight comforting. He reached for the flashlight resting on the top shelf. It felt familiar in his hand, a tool of both utility and defense. Stepping outside again, he steadied himself as the laughter from the gang faded into whispers of disbelief. He had to outsmart them. He wasn't just a farmer, he was a protector. Without a word, he slipped behind the house, into the welcome embrace of darkness that shielded him from their sight. With stealth, Tom moved toward the thick woods lining one side of his property. The tall grass brushed against his legs, the cool air filling his lungs. He had played here as a boy, roaming freely among the trees, and now they felt like allies, friends who would guard him against the impending threat. Peering through the bushes, he watched the gang regroup. One of them asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Tom felt the tingle of excitement rush through him. They were confused. They had made a mistake underestimating him. He crouched low, listening as their voices faded into the distance, drifting toward the front of the house. Now was his chance to slip away. He dashed away from the woods and toward the old barn, an archaic structure filled with memories and tools that could turn the tide of this confrontation. When he reached the barn, he creaked the door open, stepping quietly inside. The scent of hay mingled with old wood and rust, wrapping him in nostalgia. This place brought him solace. It had sheltered countless seasons of toil and triumph. Grabbing an old pitchfork leaned up against a wall, he gripped it tightly, feeling the heft of the wood. It was time to take back control. Silently, Tom crept through the darkened interior toward a small window. The moonlight bathed the field outside in silver light, illuminating the chaos that was about to unfold. Just outside, the gang had closed in, their voices harsh and impatient. Tom grinned, exhilaration coursing through his veins. They were like startled animals, frantic and unsteady. Tom would turn their anxiety back on them. "Let's give them something to worry about," he whispered to himself. With one sudden motion, Tom burst through the barn door, the pitchfork raised high. He shouted, fury igniting his voice. The gang turned in shock, eyes widening as he charged toward them, pitchfork glinting in the moonlight. The bravado in their faces evaporated, replaced by fear as Tom sprang forward, deftly dodging their confused shouts. Jace barked, instinctively rallying his crew, but Tom was already weaving through the tall grass, fast and nimble, every step igniting the adrenaline coursing through him. As he gained distance, Tom moved toward the edge of the woods, where he knew every twist and turn, each hidden path that would lead him to safety. Behind him, the shouts grew louder, their attempts to corner him growing more desperate. One shouted, panic lacing his voice as they fell into disarray. Tom could hear their movements growing frantic as he plunged deeper into the woods. Ghostly shadows danced around him, the branches above casting long fingers of darkness across the ground. In this part of his land, he felt invincible. The thick underbrush shielded him like a cloak, dampening his footsteps. He navigated through the trees as easily as he had when he was a child, confident, assured. Memories of games played in these woods flooded his mind, the laughter, the joy of childhood freedom. Rounding a thick oak, Tom paused to catch his breath. He could hear their voices fading slightly, frustration tinging their expressions. He had gained precious seconds, and he needed to use them. Moving with purpose, he made his way toward the edge of the property, knowing the old creek lay just ahead. The water glimmered in the moonlight, calm and inviting. This was another secret path known only to him, a route that skirted around the back of his farm and into the fields behind. Suddenly, the sound of revving engines returned. The gang was regrouping, their confidence bolstered again as they circled back to their bikes. "He can't get far," Jace shouted, anger cutting through his voice. But Tom was already one step ahead, crouched low by the creek, calculating his next move. His survival instincts kicked in. He knew he had to keep them on their toes. The current flowed steadily beside him, a reminder of the power of nature and the resilience of his spirit. Taking in a breath, he decided it was time to draw them in deeper, far from the farmhouse. Just as they approached with their flashlights sweeping the area, Tom raised his voice, letting it echo through the trees. The gang froze, momentarily disoriented. One asked, glancing around nervously. With that moment of uncertainty, Tom darted forward, splashing through the creek, the cold water soaking his boots but invigorating him. The gang hesitated, then rushed toward the sound of his voice, drawn into the web he was weaving. As he crossed the creek and dashed into the thicket on the other side, he heard their frustration grow. He must be by the creek. Tom felt a thrill surge through him. Thrill of the hunt had shifted. Now he was the one luring them into a trap. He moved deeper into the woods, slipping through the trees until he reached a tiny clearing where he could hear the gang approaching from another direction. They were chaotic now, their earlier bravado reduced to frantic whispers. "He's around here somewhere." Keeping low, Tom pressed his back against a tree. He could see through the foliage, watching as they scattered, confusion evident in their every gesture. It was a sign they were losing control. Feeling emboldened, Tom seized the moment to create one more distraction. He reached to the ground, picking up a few small stones. He tossed them deeper into the woods, sending a cascade of noise that echoed through the trees. One of the men shouted, pointing toward the sound. The gang rushed off in that direction, leaving Tom free to slip away further into the thicket. He quickened his pace, moving as quietly as he could. The adrenaline surged again, propelling him forward. Up ahead, the old windmill came into view, a relic of his family's past. It was a symbol of their tenacity, a place that had withstood storms, just as he was doing now. Tom reached the windmill and crouched behind its base, catching his breath. He could hear their disarray growing more pronounced, angry shouts and frustrated cries mingling with the rustling leaves. In that moment, he finally felt a sense of control. "Let's split up," Jace ordered. "We can't let him keep running." Tom held his breath as he listened. The sound of footsteps moved far away from him, retreating into the woods. Now's his chance to take back the fight. He thought of the years spent tilting the soil, planting seeds, nurturing life. Rising from his crouch, he moved with purpose towards the nearest exit. He had one final plan, a chance to reclaim dominance. As he stepped toward the back of the windmill, he could see the gang's confounded silhouettes. This time, they wouldn't see him coming. He needed to use their own overconfidence against them. With a swift motion, he grabbed a handful of stones from the base of the windmill and tossed them toward the field where the bikes were parked. The stones clinked as they hit the metal, the sound sharp against the stillness. He yelled, letting the thrill of the moment carry him. They turned, startled. One shouted. Jace's eyes blazed with anger as he swung around, moving toward the sound. "We don't have time for games. Bet you didn't expect the farmer to turn the tables," Tom muttered under his breath, moving cautiously behind the windmill toward the narrow path leading back to the barn. He sprinted, fueled by the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew he'd have to be swift. The sound of their footsteps echoed behind him, a reminder that they would soon realize he'd outsmarted them. As he reached the barn, he slipped inside the shadowy interior, heart racing like a drum in his chest. Time felt suspended as he waited for them to approach, the anticipation tingling in his fingertips. Then, as Jace and a couple of gang members burst through the barn door, their eyes wide with fury, Tom struck. He swung the pitchfork outward, catching Jace by surprise. The man stumbled backward, grimacing in disbelief. He shouted, fury filling the air. Fueled by resolve, Tom charged forward, relentless. He yelled, voice trembling with passion. The gang scattered, their earlier confidence now dissolved into chaos. Tom lunged at the others, focusing on keeping them off balance, driving them further into confusion. One of them yelled, fear flashing in his eyes, and Tom felt an exhilarating rush. He was no longer just protecting. He had become a force to be reckoned with. "Keep running," Tom shouted, relishing their panic as he weaved between them, each dodge and strike fueled by years of defending his land. Each swing of the pitchfork felt like an embodiment of every farmer before him, standing firm against the tide of adversity. The cries of confusion echoed through the barn as they tried to regroup, falling one by one to his unyielding spirit. Outsmarted by a farmer, Tom chuckled, confidence surging through him. With one final swing, he caught a gang member off balance, sending him sprawling into a stack of hay bales. Jace was fury incarnate, scrambling to his feet, eyes ablaze as he turned toward Tom. But Tom stood strong. Not today. Just as Jace lunged forward, the barn door swung wide open. Behind Tom, the cool night air rushed in, a reminder of the world beyond. Jace shouted, yet even as he called to his gang, the fight had gone out of them. Tom could sense their fear rising, the frustration pulsing through the air. Tom declared, confidence rising as the gang hesitated. In a final act of defiance, he lunged forward, slamming the pitchfork down as Jace stumbled back, falling into the darkness outside. With their leader cornered, the rest of the gang broke into panic, scattering like birds startled from their perch. Tom felt the exhilaration rush through him as the gang fled into the night, abandoning their bikes in their haste. Breathless, he emerged from the barn, pitchfork still gripped tight in his hand. The fury faded, replaced by a sense of victory. The night belonged to him. He had defended his land, his legacy. As he stood there, scattered debris around him, the sound of cicadas returned, wrapping the air in a familiar hum. The stars twinkled overhead, 1,000 eyes watching, witnessing the courage of one farmer against the storm. Tom took a deep breath, looking around at the fields that stretched endlessly and the old farmhouse that stood proud and welcoming in the moonlight. He knew every exit, every hiding place, every inch of this beautiful land. He had fought fiercely, not just for himself but for generations before him. As he made his way back inside, a sense of purpose filled him. He could still hear the whispers of his forefathers, their strength coursing through his blood, grounding him in the legacy he would continue to defend. In that moment, he felt invincible. He was the farmer, and this was his home, forever and always. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and pink. Tom Parker stood on the porch of his weathered farmhouse, arms crossed, watching the fields gently sway in the evening breeze. The day had been long, filled with the mundane rhythms of farm life, feeding the livestock, repairing fences, tilling the earth. Yet beneath the tranquil surface of rural life, something felt amiss. An unsettling quiet enveloped the farm, the kind that whispers of trouble brewing just out of sight. Suddenly, the familiar sound of engines interrupted the stillness. Tom's heart skipped a beat. He squinted toward the dirt road leading to his property. A string of motorcycles emerged from the tree line, their headlights cutting through the dusky twilight. One glance told him everything he needed to know. The gang had arrived. He could see them now, a group of 6 men, clad in leather, their faces masked by shadows and bravado. They moved like predators, circling closer, eyes gleaming with ill intent. Tom's mind raced. There were stories in town about these men, reports of intimidation, theft, and violence. He had always dismissed it as hearsay, the kind of scare tactics that could ripple through a small community. But now that fear was materializing right before his eyes. "They're not here for a chat," he muttered to himself, scanning the perimeter of his house. He felt the knot of anxiety tighten in his gut. The farmhouse, built by his grandfather, held memories in its walls, years of labor, love, and resilience. He would fight to protect it. As the roar of engines drew closer, Tom stepped down from the porch, steadying his breath. He could hear them laughing, the sound twisted and jarring against the peaceful backdrop of his farm. "Look at that old man," one of them taunted, a burly figure with a thick neck and an unsettling grin. "What's he gonna do?" Tom felt his patience fervently slip away, replaced by an undying spirit of defiance. "This is my land and you have no business here," he shouted, his voice projecting firmly into the dusk. The laughter fanned out, mocking him like the crackle of a campfire losing its warmth. The leader retorted, edging closer to the porch. Every instinct in Tom urged him to retreat, to hide away and let them take what they wanted. But the very essence of his being screamed against it. He would not be a victim today. Taking a deep breath, he turned and stormed back into the house without another word. Inside, a wave of determination surged through him. He could feel the weight of generations pressing down on him, their legacy, their struggles. Every moment spent working this land had prepared him for this. He ran through the narrow hallways, casting a glance at the family photos lining the walls, images of men and women who had fought for this very ground. Grabbing a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer, he gripped it like a lifeline. Then, with every ounce of resolve, he pushed through the back door and stepped outside into the encroaching night. The gang had split up, moving to surround the farmhouse like wolves closing in on a lone deer. He could hardly hear the murmurs of their confusion. One called out, clearly uncertain. Tom's pulse quickened. This chaos played to his advantage. Just as he had been trained by years of nurturing crops and caring for his land, he could navigate this. He knew every path, every hidden corner of this property. With that thought, he dashed toward the edge of the yard and into the thicket bordering his fields. The world transformed as he stepped into the darkness of the woods. The songs of crickets filled the air, mingling with his racing heartbeat. He pressed against a thick tree trunk, breath hanging heavily in his chest as he listened to the gang bicker outside. They were frustrated, disoriented by the very land that felt so familiar to him. It was Jace again, his voice drenched in impatience. Tom suppressed a smile, retreating deeper into the shadows. As he navigated the lush undergrowth, memories flooded his mind, hiding as a child during games of hide-and-seek, learning the land like a second skin. He felt a rush of nostalgia, a reminder of the roots anchoring him, reminding him that he belonged here. This land was his ally tonight. Emerging on the other side of the dense brush, he spotted the old barn rising up against the night sky. Relief washed over him as he darted toward it, silhouetted against the luminous moonlight. Every creak of the barn door echoed his determination as he slipped inside, moving with purpose. Dust motes floated in the beams of moonlight spilling through the cracks, a haunting reminder of time that had passed. But this barn was a sanctuary, a repository of years filled with hard work and loyalty. Grabbing a pitchfork leaned against the wall, he felt a blend of nostalgia and empowerment. Through the cracks in the barn door, Tom could see the gang regrouping outside. Their laughter had evaporated into uncertainty. One shouted, anxiety tinging his voice. Tom positioned himself near the door, heart racing. Their growing desperation fed his resolve. "Let's give them something to chase," he whispered to himself. His voice rang out across the field like a battle cry, echoing through the stillness. For a moment, the gang froze, surprised. Tom took off running toward the creek that bisected his property, the sound of rushing water pulling him forward. Behind him, he could hear their startled yells as they bolted out of their stupor, scrambling to catch him. Jace shouted, his authority wavering in the pulse of fear that coursed through their ranks. Tom felt exhilaration course through him as he sprinted, heart hammering against his chest. He plunged into the creek, the cold water splashing against his legs. It was refreshing, grounding him further as the gang approached the bank. He's by the water, but Tom had lived here long enough to know that the creek had twists and turns that could lead him to safety routes obscured by thick weeds. He moved quickly, navigating the banks, knowing he had the upper hand. Suddenly, there was a loud splash. One of the gang members, rushing forward, lost his footing, tumbled into the water, sending ripples racing across the surface. Laughter erupted from Tom's chest, the sound breaking the tension as he pushed himself further away. "Keep moving," Jace shouted, recovering quickly from the momentary chaos. Tom could hear them gaining ground, the voices melding into frustrated cries. Navigating upstream, he emerged onto the opposite bank, taking a moment to catch his breath. He could hear the crackling laughter and chaos behind him, their voices growing more frayed. Someone gasped, breathless from the chase. He remembered the old trees along the edge of his property, the sturdy trunks that had stood through countless storms. They offered shelter, a means to slip away. Tom sped through the underbrush, feeling alive, more alive than he'd felt in years. The thrill of the hunt, the instinct to protect his home, urged him on. As he moved further into the thicket, he paused to listen. "I swear I'll find him," Jace shouted, determination ringing true in his voice. But Tom was already weaving between the trees, ducking low, using the shadows to cloak his movements. He pushed deeper into the woods, knowing every inch of this land was his ally. It became a game of concealment as he worked to remain just out of their sight. He could hear them fuming, tossing accusations at one another. "You're the one who let him escape." Tom smiled, pride swelling in his chest. Their panic felt like music chaos tempered by his control. He edged around a moss-covered rock and took a deep breath. In the frights of the evening, there was an undercurrent of confidence. He wasn't just the farmer, they had stirred the heart of a protector. Then he spotted it, just up ahead. The old windmill, a remnant of the past, stood tall against the moonlit sky. It had weathered storms and endured time with unwavering strength. His heartbeat quickened at that symbol of resilience. Determined to get there before they could regroup, Tom sprinted toward it, the grass brushing against his legs. He could see the gang regaining composure, the panic beginning to ease as they narrowed their focus on the area. He needed to be quick. As he reached the windmill, he ducked behind it, catching his breath. In the distance, he could still hear Jace barking orders. He's got to be close, spread out. As they approached the windmill, Tom's mind raced. He could either make a break for the farmhouse or take a stand here. For a moment he hesitated, adrenaline coursing through him. Then it hit him. This was the moment he needed to draw the line. They had come onto his land. It was time to defend it. He steadied himself and grabbed a loose rock from the base of the windmill, holding it tightly in his hand. As Jace and a couple of gang members neared, Tom stepped out with sudden force. He shouted, throwing the rock at their feet. The sound echoed around them, a reminder of the chaos of earlier. The gang stopped short, eyes wide with disbelief. Jace scoffed, but Tom could see the flicker of uncertainty across his face. It was enough. Using their doubt to fuel his passion, he lunged toward them, fists raised high. Tom charged, feeling the pitchfork snugly within his grip, ready to defend his home. Jace shouted, stepping forward defiantly. But Tom, possessed by all the generations before him, felt unstoppable. With one swift motion, he swung the pitchfork, sending a tremor of shock through the gang. Jace stumbled, catching only a glimpse of determination before Tom surged forward, brandishing his weapon like a shield against everything they represented: fear, intimidation, and chaos. But the gang started to react, scrambling backward in their haste. "We didn't come here to get hurt," one of them yelled as panic mounted. Tom shouted back, feeling the weight of his ancestors behind him as he pressed the attack. The chaos unfolded around him, a swirling mess of movement and desperate screams. Fueled by the adrenaline of the moment, Tom pressed forward, determined to reclaim what was rightfully his. They were cornered, exposed for their arrogance and lack of foresight. As Jace frantically waved his arms, calling for a retreat, Tom could feel victory surging within him. Sweat dripped down his brow, but he was far from finished. But just as he prepared to chase them away, he heard a sound from the distance, a low rumble growing louder with each passing second. The gang hesitated, eyes darting toward the horizon, confused grumbling filling the air. One of them asked, fear creeping into his voice. Tom, too, turned, heart racing as he watched black clouds rolling in overhead. An impending storm was barreling toward them, and for a moment he felt a flicker of concern. It felt almost overwhelming, like the world had shifted in an instant. Suddenly, a blinding flash illuminated the sky, followed by a deafening crack of thunder that rattled the ground beneath Tom's feet. Fear surged through him as he quickly turned back to the gang, ready to capitalize on their newfound panic. But before he could advance, he saw Jace, eyes wide with terror, point toward the darkened sky. "We need to go." And just like that, the tumultuous winds picked up, whipping through the fields as if the earth itself was protesting. Tom felt the atmosphere crackle, his grip tightening around the pitchfork as he took stock of the retreating gang. He shouted, racing forward. But with the storm rolling in, their fear pushed them beyond reason. They scrambled back to their bikes, abandoning the chaos and the fight. Tom stood alone, watching them disappear down the road, the landscape rapidly darkening around him. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the tension in the air, bringing with it a wave of uncertainty. It felt as if the very world had shifted, a storm brewing not just in the skies but within the heart of the land. Breathless, Tom felt a strange mix of victory and dread wash over him. Yes, he'd won this battle, but the war. That lingered in the shadows, even as the thunder rumbled ominously overhead. The storm had come, and he couldn't help but wonder what it meant for him, for his legacy, and the fate of his land. As he stood on the edge of the farmhouse, the sky roiling above him, Tom Parker knew one thing: this wouldn't be the last he'd see of them. The winds howled, and he felt the pulse of the land beneath him, readying for whatever was coming next. The night was just beginning, and neither the storms nor the battles were finished yet.